Alrighty, gang. Here's to nights that turn into mornings and friends that turn into family. Cheers!
Happy birthday to you.
Hello. Welcome to the Friendship IRL podcast. I'm your host, Alex Alexander, and each week we explore what's working and what's not in our friendships, community, and connections. Have you ever wished you could sit down and have a conversation about what is really going on in your friendships? Well, you found your people. Join us as we dive into real-life stories and explore new ways to approach these connections. Together, we're reimagining the rules of friendship. If you are listening to this episode, you probably fall in one of three categories. You are listening to this when it's been released. And if that's you, I am recording this the week of the wildfires in Los Angeles. I think we're on day 6. They are still going. So if you're listening to this on Thursday when it's released or the weekend, then you are well aware of the collective grief in the air. Category number 2, if you are listening to this, it's probably because something has happened to someone in your life and you are just looking for a quick refresher, pep talk, guide on how to show up for this person. Or maybe you're the third category and you are just going back through the catalog of Friendship IRL episodes. And if that's the case, I love that. That's great. Now, if you fall in category 1 or 2, then you definitely could use a deep breath. And if you're in category 3, a deep breath never hurt anybody. So before we dive into this episode, I just want to take a second, wherever you are right now, for you to take a deep breath. A really, really solid exhale. Maybe let your shoulders drop, let your jaw unclench. Because if you're in category 1 or 2, you have a lot going on. And I think a deep breath never hurt anybody. Now, as these wildfires have been raging in Los Angeles, I've seen a variety of things happening, and I just want to note them because what a collective experience we're in. The first one is that there have been some really beautiful levels of response. Like I am seeing people come together, not even just in the Los Angeles community, but people far and wide, people donating their time, getting really creative with how they're showing up. I mean, I saw something this morning about like coordinated drops to firefighters for food. People are sharing their resources, not only their knowledge, but their physical, tangible items or monetary resources. We have GoFundMes flying all over the place. People sharing the news and the updates, working together to build apps or solutions for problems that we're having. And I think it's just overall, right, a collective conversation. I don't know if I've been in a single conversation in the last week where we haven't talked about these wildfires. We haven't acknowledged people we know that have lost everything or have been displaced due to evacuation orders. And I think part of this is the scale of it all. Like, because this is impacting so many people, most of us out here know someone who is impacted firsthand. And if you don't, you have a friend of a friend, which is just creating even more of this conversation about it, right? I mean, I'm seeing content online with tips and tricks and scripts and ideas and people coming together, constant sharing of mutual aid lists and lists of the GoFundMes or the organizations that are working here, lists of needs, Amazon wish lists, right? All these things, all these opportunities. Like if you want to help right now, it's hard not to find an opportunity. And that's important for something I'm going to talk about in a second. But the final thing I want to mention that I've noticed about the wildfires in particular is it has really highlighted how much people want to help. How when something bad happens, whether it's to one person, a small group of people, an entire community, or one of the biggest cities in the US, people want to help. And I've really been thinking about that because I think a huge piece of that in a world where so many of us feel so lonely and disconnected is that we want to feel tapped in to that social fabric, right? That web of connections. And when you help, when you show up, you are tapped in. It is a reminder that you are not alone and a reminder to the people maybe on the far edges of that web, way over there, people you don't even know, that you're connected to them and they are connected to you. They are not alone in what they're experiencing. Now, as we all know, this is such a big catastrophe that it is everywhere. I've talked about some of the unique pieces of that just now. But what happens if you are listening to this down the line and something has just happened to a friend of yours? Like perhaps a couple years from now, after I've recorded this episode, a friend of yours loses their house in a fire. And maybe it's not getting a bunch of media coverage. And you aren't seeing endless scripts and resources and opportunities. Things aren't being shared the way they are right now. If that's you, then I just want to acknowledge that you might be feeling overwhelmed, but for a different reason. Like right now, I feel like so many of us in this big nation, worldwide known catastrophe, it's almost an overwhelm of too many opportunities. If you are just experiencing something that happened to a friend and you want to help them, you might be overwhelmed because you don't know what to do because nobody is sending you endless lists. Because you want to help, but you're terrified of doing it wrong and there aren't just endless scripts everywhere for you to follow. I think that in either way, whether there's an overwhelm of too many opportunities or an overwhelm of not knowing, some of the things we're going to talk about today are going to help you understand how to show up for people during a loss. And I know I'm talking about the LA fires. This could be a natural disaster, but it also could be a personal tragedy, whether that's a loss of a home, a loss of a loved one. It could be a life-changing diagnosis, a breakup, a divorce. It could be an ambiguous loss where everything on the outside like looks the same. You haven't actually lost someone or something, but everything feels completely different and your life is forever changed. I think that whatever the loss is, there are some pieces of today's episode that you can use to help guide you through how to show up for the people that you care about. I have a bunch of other episodes on how to support someone who's lost a loved one or a spouse or going through pregnancy loss, like all these very specific examples and stories. And you could go in and listen to all of those. But sometimes in a moment of crisis, what you need is just a short little podcast episode like this one that you can put on and listen to help guide you through the moment. And that's what this episode is. Whether it's for you or if you need to send it to someone who's struggling, I hope this is your guide. And if you're like, okay, Alex, well, why should I listen to you? I, like all of us, have really no shortage of loss in my life, of moments where I needed support or have given support. I mean, a really big one that stands out is me losing my mom when I was 13. I still have so many things about that loss that stand out and how people showed up for us that I know really made an impact. And I think because I experienced that loss so young, I have always been a person in my communities and my circles who is kind of on the front lines for a lot of people, whether that is a massive breakup where people are like having to move out, or, the number of people with a loss of parent who have reached out to me. Could be a medically complex situation, an extended hospital stay, loss of a child, divorce, illness, loss of a pet, loss of a job. So many spots where I've had people reach out to me and I've kind of been in that inner circle of helping them navigate through it. And because of that, there are a couple just like overall key truths to this moment if you want to show up and give support that I'm just going to put out there. The first one is that there is no perfect way to show up. Stop putting that pressure on yourself. It's all messy right now anyways. You just kind of got to join in the mess. And you got to be okay with the fact that you're probably going to make mistakes, or the thing that you decide is the most needed may not be. And you just got to try and do your best. My second key truth is that you cannot fix what is happening. Take it from someone who has tried, who has been overly vigilant, has tried to anticipate it. You probably can't fix it. So what you need to do instead is just be a part of the process. Could be a big part, could be a little part. You're just part of it. But you at the end of the day aren't responsible for fixing what's happening right now. You got to be in the mess with the person. And the third one is that giving support, showing up for someone in the middle of something really hard like this is uncomfortable. And that's just the normal. Like your friend, your family member, your person who needs your support, they are uncomfortable. They're not okay, right? They're not stable. And if you're getting in there with them, it's going to be uncomfortable for you. You don't have to know what they're going through. You don't have to be experiencing the same things as they are. You might be simultaneously, while you're trying to help your person, struggling with something else. You may not be able to show up in the ways they need. You might have to sit with someone while they cry. And that might make you sad too. And that's just the way it is. It's going to be uncomfortable. You just got to roll with it. So now I kind of want to walk you through, like, the crisis has happened, and here's some of the ways I think about this. And the first one is that often, like in that moment of crisis, if you are trying to support someone, it has just happened, you have to think about it in kind of this immediate needs first framework. And this idea of, because you aren't the one experiencing it, your world has not just completely fallen apart. You haven't been in the accident. You haven't lost this person. In those immediate moments, whether that is minutes, hours, days, it's just immediate needs. That's all that person can think about. That's all they can handle. And that's really all they need, to be honest with you. But I think sometimes when you're the person giving support, when you're a little bit on the outside and you have a little more brain power, right? You're not in absolute fight or flight. You might already be thinking of like the things they're going to need in a week, in 2 weeks, in a month. Don't go there yet. Immediate needs first. I'm talking things like, do they have physical shelter? Do they need medical attention? Do they need food or water, clothing? Like, check on the most basic of things. And naturally, I think we do this, right? If somebody gets in an accident, if they are riding their bike and they are hit, we know to call 911. But that could be the same thing if somebody's house burns down, if there is the loss, like if a loved one has passed away, your spouse. Think of the most immediate things first. Like, have they eaten in the past 12 hours? Are they out of harm's way? Do they need medical attention? Do they have somewhere to sleep tonight? Focus on those things and really try and assess what's truly urgent rather than jumping into action. And maybe, right, you might hear that somebody just got in a car accident and they are going to be stuck in bed for a couple months while they recover. And in those first couple hours, you're thinking like, well, they're going to need a meal train. Just stop. Just stop for a second. I've been there. I've done that. We got to just assess what's really urgent. And then when the person has some of those very, very immediate needs taken care of, I think we all just need to think about like this idea of a freeze state. I've experienced this many a time in my life with different losses. I mean, if I think back to when my mom passed away, I know I was only 13, but there's kind of this 2-week foggy period where I honestly don't even know what happened. I was home from school. I think I just kind of walked around the house. I probably laid places, sometimes in my bed, but maybe on the couch. Honestly, I could see myself laying on the floor. I probably didn't eat a ton. I wasn't hungry. I have this very, very, very vivid memory of a extended family member coming to our house. I want to say like it might have been the night. If not, it was the next day. And they brought what they were going to eat for dinner. And when I tell you they were going to make squid, like calamari for dinner, I was 13. And like, that's kind. You want to feed me, but maybe you should have just brought me a bagel kind of thing. I probably hadn't showered in a while. My clothes were probably smelly. Like freeze state is not pretty, but it's necessary, right? Your body is in shock. Your whole world has been tumbled around. And I think as somebody who is supporting people, because we can see further, we can see out, right? We can want to maybe push them to fill out those important forms or call that person back or get up and move out of the house every day. And I would ask you, like, is it really necessary? Do they have to? Because what actually might be more supportive is trying to create a safe space for them where they don't have to exist with the world for a moment and they can just process the loss they've experienced. What might be more supportive is protecting their downtime. Like if they really, really need to talk to somebody about official matters, can you take that call and tell them, like, what do you need? What can't wait for a week? Can you manage other people's expectations? Because I'll tell you from personal experience that pushing through the freeze state is possible. You're not going to get the best results from this person. Like even the things they tell you, they may not even remember. They may not be thinking clearly. But also on a more personal level, I know from experience, like if you push through the freeze state, it almost always will catch up to you. At some point, it will catch up to you and you will be taken down. And at that point, it's almost a little harder because everybody's like, well, you pushed through already. Like, what are you doing now? So if you are showing up for someone, if you are trying to support someone, a way you might be able to show up for them is just trying to do whatever you can to support them in that safe space, whether that is helping manage outside expectations, being that kind of like first line of defense. It could mean just dropping off whatever comfort food. You don't need to ask them what they want in those first few days. Not necessary. Like try and use information if they're celiac, don't drop any bagels with gluten off. But otherwise, it doesn't matter. Like they're just maybe going to eat the most basic of things. You don't need a list from them. Just go to the store and pick up some stuff. It could be providing a space for them. It could be if they just lost their spouse or a loved one, maybe they don't want to go home. Maybe they would prefer to just rot away in your guest room and not be seen for a week, where they don't have to be surrounded by memories. Like there are so many ways to support someone in that initial shock. And now that I've talked through this immediate shock phase, let's talk about something that trips up a lot of people, and that is the timing of support. And what I mean by that is when we hear about somebody going through crisis and we are panicked and our nervous system is through the roof and we can't imagine that happening and we love that person so much, we want to fix it. We want to help them. We want to rally around them. It can feel like it needs to happen right now, right? Everybody else goes on hyper speed in the exact moment that the person who's probably experiencing this loss has just dropped into sloth mode. It can be a lot. And like collectively right now, I feel like I'm watching that. So instead of following the tricks your brain is playing that says like, I need to do everything right now, that is not true. That is not true. Sure, there are going to be some very immediate needs, maybe. I mean, I've just covered probably at least a few days, if not a few weeks, right? Like you got some time between the initial like safety phase and the shock phase to get yourself collected here. If you're not the person that's dealing with those, you have a minute. So don't feel like you have to jump in the exact minute. In fact, it's never too late. I think a lot of people think, oh, well, I failed to show up in the beginning, so now I've missed my chance. And it's like, no. This is a marathon, whatever this crisis your person is going through. And maybe you're a relief pitcher. Man, that's quite the metaphor for me to throw out. I'm not even a sport person, but maybe you can already tell that you are going to come in and relieve one of those immediate people at some point. And that may not be for days or weeks or months. So don't feel like if you don't show up right in the beginning, that's okay. And in those first few days, when the crisis is happening, when we're in the safety and the shock phase, that's a great moment, if you aren't the person that's trying to support through that, to take a second and think about what is needed. Get intentional. Think about who the other key people are in your friend or family member's life that you can coordinate with. Reach out, start brainstorming. Maybe even tell them like, hey, I think I'm better to come in and do this thing. Like a personal example of that would be when I had some friends who had a loved one in the hospital for a really extended period of time, and their immediate family went and stayed in their house to help them out, like with the dog and the mail and cooking and life. After a few months of their immediate family staying there, I came in and was like, hey, I can come stay for 2 weeks. Mind you, they are like 6 months into this crisis at this point. But it gave their immediate caregivers the time to go home for a couple weeks and get their life in order and deal with some things they needed to deal with. And I already knew when the crisis happened that I could do that down the line. And that's really valuable. Now, the other thing to think about is just this idea of being a consistent presence. And this can look a variety of ways. It could be committing to dropping off a meal every other week for a few months. It could be consistent donations. It could be taking on a task for a period of time, like taking out your neighbor's trash cans for the foreseeable future while they're dealing with a crisis. It could also be just checking in, whether that is, hey, thinking of you, no need to respond kind of text messages, or maybe they are actually more actionable check-ins. Maybe it's sending a message being like, hey, driving through your neighborhood in an hour, I'm dropping something off on your front porch. You drop off a coffee or an activity or whatever. And then a week or two later, it's, hey, I am going to the grocery store. Anything you need, I'll pick it up and drop it off at your door by 4 p.m. today. Maybe then a couple weeks later, it's, hey, I'm taking my kids to the park. Can I swing by and grab yours so that you have some time to do whatever you need to do or want to do this afternoon? And they can say no. They can say no to any of these. But it's just like making a decision with yourself to continually, like, this isn't a one-time offer. How can you make it sustainable so that you can keep checking in and making these offers and providing some consistency? Now, notice the offers that I did suggest there were a couple things about them, right? They are specific. None of that like, hey, if you think of anything you need, reach out. It's not helpful. One, we've already covered they're not in a great mental space. Two, they may not know how that really works into your life. If that's a skill set you have, if that's something you can do, that'll hold them back from asking the person who needs support. They just won't, probably. Three, you're kind of giving them homework, if you think about it. And that's what you're trying to take off their plate in a really, really intense time is the homework, the thought. Just start offering things. It's okay if they say no. But when you give these very specific examples, like say the picking something up at the grocery store, once you've offered that, like now, a couple weeks later, they might send you a message that says, hey, if you're going to the store this week, I have a few items that would be really helpful if you could pick up, right? Like they know now how you're already willing to show up. So be sure to be really specific. Now, here's something that might surprise you, and that is that the most helpful support often comes from people simply doing what they're naturally good at. So take a second and think about some of the things that people come to you for help. I think quite often when people are coming to us for it, when it feels so natural, we tend to discount it, right? Because we're like, well, that's so easy for me. Nobody would need that. nobody would want that. Or we have this idea that helping someone should kind of be like a struggle or a burden. And that is so not the case. That can happen sometimes, sure. It doesn't need to be that way. In fact, the best support comes from when you can just naturally fold it into your life and it's already something that you're good at. So that's why it's such a good idea to think about the things that maybe aren't traditional support, right? There always tends to be, in a moment of crisis, this jump to providing a meal train. And sure, somebody might need that, but that actually may not be that useful or needed. Maybe they need somebody to do research on a specific topic. Maybe they need skills that you feel like are just so silly. It could be organizing. You love organizing. It could be packing to move. It could be sorting through, these are a lot of moving and organizing. It could be sorting through a loved one's belongings and helping them let go and categorize what they're keeping and what they're not. Could be errands or walking their dog, taking their trash cans out. Maybe it has to do with your area of work. Normally you would maybe charge for legal advice or tax advice, but you can just easily answer questions for somebody who's really in the thick of it because it's already what you do. An example, maybe here you're listening to this podcast, something I could offer somebody if they needed to get their message out is, hey, I have equipment, right? I have software. I could help you record something and put it out there. Some other personal examples are, errands. I have a lot of flexibility of time, so I can definitely do errands for people. I'm more than happy to lend a little bit of time for childcare or watching your pets, especially your dogs. I love the dogs. Maybe I have an item, like a physical item, a tangible item that somebody needs. I'm more than happy to loan that to them. Airport pickups. We love to have people in our home. So another maybe less traditional one would be if somebody nearby us had a crisis and their, let's say, immediate family, their parents or their siblings wanted to come up and help them, or close friend, really anybody, we could offer our guest room. They are welcome to stay here. I wouldn't even second guess that. Now, these are some of my unique ways of offering support. And that's what I'm trying to tell you here is that it is always helpful, even in that initial safety and shock moment. You can do this exercise, but if you're listening to this episode and you are not there, do it now. Spend some time thinking about the ways that you naturally show up, the things you like doing, the things you're good at doing, the things you've developed skills to do, the resources you have. The more creative, the better. If you are amazing at Excel spreadsheets, then keep that in your back pocket because you never know in a moment of crisis where somebody might need exactly that skill. Creating art, music, broadcasting, providing, I'm trying to think, we have so many board games in our house, right? If there was a moment of crisis, it's here, let me take a bunch of board games to a kids center. So make that list for yourself and find your lane. It could be that you're somebody who is just really good at sitting with somebody in a hard moment and you can provide some sort of emotional support. Now, that could be with a really close loved one. It could also just be knowing that you're really good at this. And let's say you are visiting a loved one in the hospital and you see someone else sitting on a bench, a stranger you've never known. Maybe you just sit next to them. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. You could just sit there. Those are some of my most practical tips I can give you, the way to think through a crisis if somebody you love is in the middle of it. How to think through the ways that you show up to support each other. And now that we know what we can do, let's talk about how we do it in a way that actually helps. So I have a few more practical tips to close out this episode. When we're talking about communication, I want to remind you not to try and force positivity. Don't try and find silver linings. It's okay if they are mad, angry, sad, frustrated. Just let them be. Just validate that experience, right? That is so hard. What you're experiencing is intense. Things like that. My next one is to avoid comparison. They don't need to hear about the time that you lost something or lost somebody. Like my only caveat to this would be if you have experienced something so similar and you have a very, very practical application tip, right? If you also lost your house in a fire and you know how to handle the insurance adjusters, like maybe you can acknowledge that. But otherwise, you don't need to bring up your own stuff. Just let the person have their own feelings. Let it be about them. I've already covered this one, but my next one is always give specific offers. Always, 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 always. Don't give general offers. And I think we do that because we want people to feel like they have this freedom to modify, right? Or like come up with really what they need. They're probably in a state of shock that they'll probably just say yes, even if it's not 100% right. And if they're kind of coming out of it, they can always ask for adjustments. They can say like, hey, this week I don't need groceries, but next week that actually would be really helpful. So don't leave it so open-ended. When it comes to managing the dynamics of care and support, I want to remind you that it's always better to coordinate with others, especially if you're feeling like you alone have to support this person. Like maybe it's one of your closest people. It's your parent, your sibling, your child, your best friend, your spouse, right? And you might feel like it's all you. Communicate out. And you also might be somebody out there who is a little more on the outskirts. You're like a friend, but you weren't the one they called to come to the hospital. You don't have to do it alone. This is the time to get creative. This is the time to message people on social media platforms that you know are their friends or a part of a community. Email a community organization that they're a part of. Tap into their existing networks, right? Send that message that says, hey, I'm Alex. I don't know if you heard, but my friend blank was in an accident. I know they're a member of your organization. I'd love to let you know some of the ways that we've set up to help them, right? Coordinate with others, talk about it, which also ties into my next one, which was use your existing networks. In moments of crisis is when we see how far and wide people will show up for us. I mean, this catastrophe, these wildfires in LA, they are such an example. Let this be a reminder. Let any time that somebody in your life that is like far in your community, you kind of know them, that you have wanted to help them in some small way, be a reminder. It is worth it to let your wider network know. That is why we build this entire web of connection, right? Schools, workplaces. And the other thing about that broad reaching network is that when you do that, there might be really, really specific niche ways that your person needs support. They might need very specific type of legal support or medical support or a connection to somebody who can fix drywall. Like it could be something very specific. If you need help with your drywall, that will not be me. I cannot do that for you. I am very bad at it. I have tried. So I, though, can help communicate out to that broader network because that might be somebody's skill set. And that's how we're going to avoid gaps in support. Now, before we wrap up, I want to address something that I hear all the time. And that is people will always tell me like, it just doesn't feel like enough. I don't feel like I'm doing enough. So if that is you, I want to remind you that the biggest way you can combat that is communicating with the broader web of connection. Because when you start to see some transparency about that this person has dropped off groceries and this person is helping with their dog and this person is helping with childcare and this person is helping with legal, suddenly it doesn't feel like it's all on you. And it gives some guide for where you can think of your strengths and how you fit into the broader puzzle. The whole goal here is that it's not just one person because that's not sustainable. So you don't have to do it all. Just talk to those friends of friends, the communities, the connections, the person coordinating it, because that is the way to create the support the person actually needs. If you are in the middle of supporting someone right now, I see you. I want to remind you that what you're doing matters, even if it feels small, especially if it feels small. Until next time, keep being brave enough to show up. Thank you for listening to this episode of Friendship IRL. I am so honored to have these conversations with you, but don't let the chat die here. send me a voice message. I created a special website just to chat with you. You can find it at alex.chat. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle at it's Alex Alexander, or go ahead and leave a review wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. Now, if you want to take this conversation a step further, send this episode to a friend. Tell them you found it interesting and use what we just talked about as a conversation starter the next time you and your friend hang out. No need for a teary goodbye. I'll be back with a new episode next week.